Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025. This is the Excerpt. Today we discuss allegations against Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense, plus there are new fire concerns near San Diego, and what a Trump executive order means for wind energy. In a signed affidavit, Pete Hegseth's former sister-in-law claimed his ex-wife was terrified of him. I spoke with USA Today Pentagon correspondent Tom Vandenbroek for more into allegations surrounding President Donald Trump's nominee for Secretary of Defense. Tom, how are you, sir?
I'm well, Taylor. Good to be here.
Good to have you as always, Tom. So let's just start here. What did Pete Hegseth's former sister-in-law say on this? What are some of the allegations?
Well, Taylor, it comes in the form of an affidavit that she signed to the Senate Armed Services Committee, and Ranking Member Jack Reed. In it, she details a number of allegations that involve abusive behavior toward one of Hegseth's ex-wives and alcohol abuse and some racial and sexual comments that are beyond the pale. These come just a couple of days before he faces a full Senate vote on his confirmation as defense secretary.
So, Tom, just without getting too graphic, can you give us a couple of examples of what we're talking about here?
Well, they center on a few things, Taylor, namely that the complainant says that Hegseth's ex-wife used a code word, a safe word, when she felt threatened, and that at one point had hidden in a closet because Hegseth had threatened her. Another batch of these allegations includes abusive drinking. A number of times he drank to excess and vomited and passed out. And in another case, he was found by a group he'd gone out with earlier, including the complainant, at a strip club in his military uniform getting a lap dance.
How have lawmakers responded here, if at all?
Well, we've heard from a number of Democratic lawmakers on the committee who said this raises troubling allegations about Hegseth and it calls for a more thorough vetting of his background. So far, we've reached out to a number of Republican senators on the committee about this particular affidavit, and we've not heard back. We've reached out to the White House as well. We're still waiting word on that. Hegseth's attorney has categorically denied this.
Okay, so what does this mean for Hegseth going forward after he already faced, allegations of sexual assault?
Well, he passed the committee on Monday by a party line vote of 14-13. So he goes to the full Senate, and the Republicans have a slight edge there. They can't afford more than 3 senators who would vote against him. So, it's a bit of a wild card. Whether it appeared before this came out that he had the votes to, get confirmed. And perhaps he still does. We don't know. The Republican senators have not been talking about this yet. Perhaps they're still digesting it. We're still waiting word on what they think about it.
All right. Tom Vandenbroek covers the Pentagon for USA Today. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Taylor.
The pastor of an inauguration prayer service attended yesterday by President Donald Trump urged the newly sworn-in president to have mercy on immigrants and transgender children, making what she called one final plea. Bishop Marianne Edgar Buddy said during her sermon at the National Cathedral as Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance watched alongside their families.
In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now.
The pastor's remarks followed a first day of Trump's second term in office that included a flurry of executive actions targeting transgender Americans and immigrants in the country illegally. Trump declared the federal government recognizes male and female as the only genders, reversing protections for transgender people put in place under former President Joe Biden. Trump also declared a national emergency at the southern border, ordered the U.S. Armed Forces to repel forms of invasion at the border, and sought to end birthright citizenship despite questions over whether doing so is constitutional. Multiple wildfires broke out in San Diego County yesterday, prompting evacuation orders, school closures, and power shutoffs, while officials in Los Angeles remained on high alert amid strong winds and dry conditions. In the San Diego area, the lilac fire grew to 85 acres and triggered evacuations. Officials said it was 50% contained as of yesterday evening, while other fires in the area continued. You can stay up on all the latest from Southern California wildfires on usatoday.com. President Trump signed an executive order yesterday on wind energy. I spoke with USA Today national correspondent Elizabeth Weiss to learn more. Hello, Beth. Great having you back on the show.
As always, a pleasure.
So just in terms of the basics, Beth, what did President Trump decide here as it pertains to wind energy?
So on Monday, he signed an executive order that temporarily halts offshore wind energy lease sales in federal waters and pauses approvals, permits, and loans for both offshore and onshore wind.
Okay, so what does that actually kind of functionally mean for the country and the wind energy industry?
It's all a little unclear. So, land-based wind turbines are a big deal. They produce a little more than 10% of the United States electricity right now. And in some states like Texas, they're almost 30% of the state's energy. So, onshore wind is a big deal. Offshore wind actually really isn't yet. There are 3 functioning offshore wind farms in the United States, and only one of them is really large scale. There's one that was just a test site. I think it's got 2 or 3 turbines. And then there's another one that's kind of intermediate. That said, there was a lot in the pipeline, though they hadn't actually started to build most of it. And it's partly because a lot of states on the East Coast had said they didn't want onshore wind, so they didn't want terrestrial wind. Better to stick it offshore, like a half-mile offshore where you couldn't see it, and so you have all the benefits of wind energy without actually having to look at it. Now that Trump wants to halt offshore wind, it's really unclear what this is going to mean.
So, Beth, you outlined in this piece that we've already seen some backlash against wind, especially at the kind of county and local level. Can you talk through that and sort of how we got to this point?
So, to recap, there's 2 kinds of wind. There are wind turbines that are on the ground, and then there are wind turbines that are out to sea. On the ground in the US, we have a ton of wind, but we've also got a lot of people who don't like it. Often for aesthetic reasons, they just don't like to look at the turbines. And I did a big project last year where we looked at every county in the United States, and 15% of US counties have either banned or blocked new utility scale wind or solar installations. So, this form of energy that is entirely renewable, and basically, once you build the turbine, it's relatively free, is blocked in a lot of places. It's a big energy source, but there has been opposition to it. And as we know, President Trump does not like wind. He doesn't like windmills. He thinks they're ugly, and he has wanted to stop them for a long time. And that's what this executive order is trying to do.
And Beth, on the other side of the coin, I mean, why do advocates argue that wind energy is important as a kind of, I guess, an aspect of the renewable conversation?
When you build a wind turbine, it is, if it's on land, which the vast majority of them are, you can still plant crops around them, you can still graze cattle around them. So it's not like they take up inordinate amounts of land mass. It is very cheap energy that is only getting cheaper because it's not like you have to buy coal or natural gas, it's just the wind. One of the issues with wind is that, and this is actually in the executive order, it's intermittent, which means the wind does not always blow. And so one of the things in the executive order is that it requires an investigation to be done on what are the issues around the intermittency of wind and the economics of it. Now, that is true. If you build a wind turbine, it does not turn every day, all day. One of the things that has really built out in the last 2 years are utility scale battery storage. I mean, we're talking, an array that's like 20, those big container ship containers in a row that's just one big battery. And so when the wind's blowing, you store the energy on these batteries. And then when you need it, which is typically when people get home from work, you can use it then. Intermittency is an issue that has been dealt with and is being dealt with, but it's clearly of concern to some in the Trump administration. It'll be very interesting to see what those reports reflect when they come out, and we don't have a timeline on those yet.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask. I mean, the language here is interesting, temporarily and pause. So what does this really mean going forward? We just have to kind of wait and see from the Trump administration?
So there are a lot of offshore projects which are at various stages of the regulatory process. So those could be canceled. Onshore, almost all wind is installed on private land, which the feds don't have control over.
Interesting stuff. Elizabeth Weiss is a national correspondent with USA Today. Thanks for helping us break it all down, Beth.
Happy to tell you what I know so far.
A huge stretch of the South was hit with winter storms yesterday as brutally cold temperatures gripped much of the nation, breaking snowfall records more than a century old in a region where even flurries are unusual. More than 30 million people were under a snowstorm warning until this morning, from southern Texas through Georgia and into Virginia. And that included the first ever blizzard warning for Louisiana. Scenes along the Gulf Coast were particularly staggering. New Orleans had not received measurable snow since 2009, and yet was blanketed with more than the 8 inches of snow forecast in some areas. Squirmy and Grubbs are not your typical YouTube stars. One of them is able-bodied, the other is not.
We have found in the years of our relationship that when people realize we're in a romantic relationship, they are often confused.
How they navigate the challenges that dichotomy presents is the point. So is how normal their lives as an interabled couple really are. The story of Hannah and Shane Burkall's relationship and others like it is captured in their new book, Interabled: True Stories About Love and Disability. I joined my colleague Dana Taylor on the Excerpt to talk about what they hope abled couples understand about interabled love. You can find that episode right here on this feed beginning at 4 p.m. Eastern Time today. And thanks for listening to the Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and if you're on a smart speaker, just ask for the Excerpt. I'm Taylor Wilson, and I'll be back tomorrow with more of the Excerpt from USA Today.